Dear students, in our previous class, we have discussed regarding the derived class, that is public derived class, protected derived class, and then private derived class. Along with that, we have discussed on the representation of the visibility mode. But in our today's class, just like derived class, that is public derived, protected derived, and private derived class, we are going to discuss about the inheritance, that is public inheritance, protected inheritance, and then private inheritance. First we shall move with public inheritance. I will continue here. This is the most used inheritance. This is the most used inheritance. Okay, just like, remember, the representation of visibility mode, how I have given you in the last class. Just you go through that representation, okay, and then you remember that after that visibility mode representation, you concentrate on these things, then you will clearly understand. Okay, this is the most used inheritance. Which one? The public inheritance. And then we shall see what will happen under this public inheritance. Okay, then in this means under this inheritance, okay, the public members of the base class, the public members of the base class, okay, become the public members of the public members of the derived class. The public members of the derived class. Okay, the first point under public inheritance is the public members of the base class. Okay, which is the base class? From the class, the derived class is inherited. That class is called as base class. Okay, the public members of the base class become the public members of the derived class. Okay, no changes. Public members of base class will become the public members of derived class. And the next point, the private members of the base class cannot be inherited. Okay, how they cannot be inherited? The public members of the base class cannot be inherited to the derived class. Okay, first you go through the explanations, then I will explain you by giving example. Okay, then you will understand clearly what actually the public inheritance means. In the first point, the public members of base class will become the public members of derived class, and the next point, the private members of the base class, okay, of the base class cannot be inherited, okay, to the derived class. They cannot be inherited, protected members. And private members. Third point, the protected members of the base class stay protected, stay protected, stay protected in the derived class. Stay protected in the derived class. Same as that of public. Here, the protected members of the base class stay protected. Okay, stay protected in the derived class. They will not going to be changed. Take one example here. Take class X. Okay, and that in private. Okay, we have two things. Int A, B. Okay, then under protected we have two things, that is we will take float here, float. Okay, X root take P comma Q. Okay, then under public we have one thing, that is void display, then class is closed. See, this is a base class. Okay, and take one derived class, that is class Y. Here what will happen for public inheritance? See, the public members of the base class, okay, become the public members of the derived class. They will become public members of the derived class. Okay, then the private members of the base class cannot be inherited. The private members of the base class cannot be inherited to derived class. Okay, then the protected members of the base class, stay protected. Okay, no changes. Stay protected under this derived class. Hope you have understood the concept of public inheritance. Now I will give you an example so that you can understand it clearly. For public inheritance, how will you give an example or a syntax for this public inheritance? Okay, write down the syntax. The syntax is okay, first write class. Okay, then subclass, or this can be called as okay, this can be called as derived class. Okay, after that put colon, then public inheritance. For that you have to write it as public. Okay, then give space, write base class. Like this we can declare, okay, the syntax of the public inheritance. Now come, we are going to discuss about the protected inheritance. Okay, just like public inheritance, now we are going to discuss about protected inheritance. Now we shall see what things will happen under protected inheritance. First point, the public members of the base class, the public members of the base class, okay, public members of the base class become protected, okay, become protected members, okay, in a derived class, in a derived class. Okay. Here the public members of base class, okay, will become the protected members in a derived class. Hope you have understood. I think no need to explain more about these things. Next, second point. The private members of the base class. Okay, the private members of the base class here cannot be inherited. Cannot be inherited. Cannot be inherited in a derived class. Cannot be inherited in a derived class. Here, the private members of the base class cannot be inherited in derived class. So we have understood this thing. Just like in public inheritance. Okay, same the tree under protected inheritance, but little bit changes here. Okay, in public inheritance, the public members of the base class will become public members in derived class. But here the public members of the base class will become protected members of in a derived class. Okay, in public inheritance, the private members of the base class cannot be inherited in derived class. Okay, but under protected inheritance, the same point repeated. Okay, the private members of the base class cannot be inherited in derived class. And comes the third point. The protected members of base class, okay, stay protected in a derived class. In a derived class, see, the protected members, okay, the protected members of base class stay protected in a derived class, just like under public inheritance. The same third point. Okay, the protected members of base class stay protected under derived class. So here I can write the syntax. Same thing we can write. Okay, same thing. No need to change anything, but just in the place of object we will write protected class. Okay, after that derived class. Then just write here protected. Then what? This one is base class. Base class. Okay, class, derived class, protected, then base class. Here we have used public, here we are using protected. Only this is just one point is difference for public inheritance and protected inheritance. That is the first point. Okay, and remaining 2 points are same in these two type of inheritance. The first point has been changed. Now we have left with only one thing, that is private inheritance. The next thing is private inheritance. Private inheritance. Now we shall see what things will happen here. The first thing, the public members of the base class of the base class the public members of the base class, okay, the public members of the base class become private members of become private members of, okay, the derived class. The derived class. Here the public members of base class will become the private members of the derived class. See, just little bit difference. Under private inheritance, under public inheritance, the public members of the base class will become public members of the derived class. And in protected inheritance, the public members of the base class will become protected members of the inheritance. And in private inheritance, the public members of the base class will become private members of the inheritance. Only this is the change. And next point, the same points, okay. The private members of the base class, the private members of the base class cannot be inherited. Okay, these things cannot be inherited in a derived class. In a derived class. Okay, look what is happening here. The private members of the base class cannot be inherited in a derived class. The same point repeated in all the three type of inheritance. Okay, second point is same. When it comes to third point, the protected members of base class, okay, stay protected, okay, in what? Stay protected in a derived class. A derived class. Okay, protected members of base class stay protected in a derived class. The same point. See, look, these 2 points are repeated in every type of inheritance. Only the first point is changed. Now write down the syntax. How can we write the syntax? The same thing, but little bit we have to do. Class, then derived class. After this, derived class, then colon. This is n. Derived class, then colon. After that, this one is private. So we have to write here private. Then this is base class. Base class. Like this, we have to define the types of inheritance. That is, one is public inheritance, the next one is protected inheritance, and the last one is the private inheritance. Now we are going to discuss about the levels of inheritance. Levels of inheritance. Levels of inheritance. Now we are going to discuss about this. A derived class extends. A derived class extends. A derived class extends its features by inheriting okay, some or all the properties of base class. Okay, look here, a derived class. Okay, a derived class. This can extend its features. Okay, this can extend its features by inheriting. Okay, by inheriting some or all the properties of base class. Okay, it can extend its features by adding or by inheriting some features of the base class, or maybe all the features of the base class. And the next, and along with these things, and adding new features of its own, new features of its own, of its own. Okay, just like either it may inherit some properties of the base class, or maybe all the properties of the base class. Along with these things, okay, it can add, okay, its own features. Okay, adding new features of its own. The derived class can add new features by itself. And then, okay, then while inheriting the data, from the data, while inheriting the data from the derived class can share properties from, you know that. Okay, derived class, what are the things that derived class is going to do? By doing these things, okay, the data from the derived class, it means by inheriting data from the derived class, okay, that just while inheriting the derived class, only while inheriting the derived class, not the data here. Okay, while inheriting the derived class, okay, this can share properties from. Okay, in how many ways this can share properties? Now we are going to see. From, okay, either from only one class. Okay, inheriting derived class is possible either from only one class, and then next more than from more than one class. Okay, and the third thing is more than here, more than one class, then more than one level. Okay, so this while inheriting the derived class, it can share the properties from. Derived class can share properties from either only one class, or more than one class, or more than one level. Now based on these things, okay, the inheritance are again classified. Okay, based on this relationship, inheritance classified as. Okay, inheritance can be classified into 5 forms. Okay, based on these levels, inheritance can be classified into 5 forms. Come, we shall see. The first one is single inheritance. Single inheritance. Okay, first classification. And the second one is multi-level inheritance. Multi-level inheritance. And the third one is multiple inheritance. Multiple inheritance. Okay, see, these are the classifications of inheritance, forms of inheritance, but these are the levels of inheritance. Okay, based on these levels, these 3 levels. Okay, inheritance is classified into again 5 types, that is single inheritance, multi-level inheritance, multiple inheritance, and the fourth one is hierarchical inheritance. And the last one is, that is hybrid inheritance. Okay, these are the 5 types of inheritance. Apart from public inheritance, protected inheritance, and private inheritance, there are 3 levels of inheritance. That is only one class, more than one class, and more than one level. Based on these levels, inheritance is again classified into 5 types, 5 forms. That is single inheritance, multi-level inheritance, multiple inheritance, hierarchical inheritance, and then hybrid inheritance. So these are some of the classifications of inheritance. Regarding these classifications, we are going to discuss in our next class. Dear students, if you have any doubts regarding this class, you can ask me personally. Thank you.